Welcome to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. Are you trying to master the game of life without success? There are secrets and strategies to living your best life. We'll share some of them with you on today's show. Take advantage of this series to become an expert at relationships. All relationships. It's time to live the life that you deserve to live. Now, here's your host, Sandra Reish.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish, a show about living your best life. Big topic today, my God, shame. Shame, shame, shame. How many times do we hear that word, use that word? It starts in our childhood. Shame on you. I remember hearing those words, shame on you. You know as a child that's not a good thing. Shame is a word that just hearing it can make you feel so uncomfortable. And as an emotion, it's one of the most painful emotions a human can experience. It's also an emotion that's probably the most avoided and defended against. So we definitely want to find out, what is shame? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it adaptive? Is it maladaptive? So I had to bring on an expert, of course. So I brought on the amazing and brilliant Melissa Hindley, psychotherapist at the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression, and specialist in emotions, trauma, shame, relationships, anxiety. These are all very connected. So first of all, welcome back to the show, Melissa.
Thank you. And I love talking about emotions, and that's my specialty. So
it really is.
Today's a very big topic. So thank you for suggesting it.
I'm so glad you were here. I'm so glad you're here and you could make it. I want to dive into it. I just want to, as always, let people know if you'd like to join the conversation, you can call us at 1-866-472-5792. If you're not comfortable on the phone, you prefer to text 1-514-796-4357. Email info@helpforanxietydepression.com. So we have to start with the $1 million question. What is shame?
Great question. And, there's a lot of differences between, sometimes shame and guilt go together. Mm-hmm. We often talk about them together. We hear about them together, but actually there's a lot of differences between the two. So definitely, when we talk about guilt, we're saying that we did a mistake, we did something wrong, and we feel guilty for it. And then when we talk about shame, it's more about our identity, where we feel like I am a mistake, and we attach it to who we are.
So I am a mistake, coming to what I brought up, adaptive or maladaptive. I am a mistake is not an adaptive or healthy thing to say to yourself. Whereas I made a mistake, and this is where I was, preparing for the show, guilt can be adaptive, because sometimes we need to know if we made a mistake, because we need to make reparations. Mm-hmm. And it's like what we talk about parenting. You want to tell your child if they did a behavior that wasn't good, but you don't want the child to be bad, the entire entity of the child. So what you're saying about shame is you become the bad.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we're going to talk about the antidote to shame. And the antidote to shame, ironically, is empathy, because we're humans and we make mistakes. So the idea is that I am flawed, I am worthless, I am a bad person, I'm not deserving of things, and therefore I need to dissolve into the floor right now. Mm-hmm. And the only way out of that is to feel like, well, hold on, I'm a human, I make mistakes, we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
So
important.
Before we go any further, I want to just mention that when people feel the emotion you just discussed, research tells us that there's 3 typical reactions to feeling shame. So think about this as you're listening, where you fit into this, and we can discuss this, is people tend to do one of these 3 things, is that they feel a sense of shame. So you get like red in the cheeks, you feel really uncomfortable, and you'll either move against shame by trying to gain control or power over others, or being aggressive. So you see this often, let's make sure we make this clear behaviorally. You see this often when, maybe someone's accused of something, or they're in the spotlight, and instead of sort of owning it or dealing with the problem, they attack the other person. So that's really moving against shame. I don't want to feel this feeling, so I'm going to make you feel ashamed.
Yeah. And I loved how you brought that up, because it's all the avoidance, right? Because that emotion is so painful. We want to blame other people so that we don't have to feel it.
The next thing that people do, which is honestly, I think the most common, is that people move away from shame by withdrawing, hiding, keeping secrets, or staying silent. And I think this is a big one, because where there's a secret, I always tell my clients, where there's a secret, there's shame. Yeah. Secrets in family make shame grow. Okay. So, but that's what people do, is that they're so uncomfortable. So let's push it away. Let's not even pretend it exists.
Yeah.
You've seen this in your clients.
All the time. Let's not talk about it. Let's try to bury it under the rug. The problem is that I guarantee you it will find a way to come out. So whether it comes out more directly or through indirect behaviors, which we can talk about later.
Yeah, I want to talk about that with you. And also, wouldn't you say that this is, as a fellow psychotherapist, isn't this like a natural segue to anxiety? I'm going to push it away, but the problem is it lives in my body. And as anxiety specialists, we know that what lives in our body that we're not dealing with comes out often as anxiety, if we're lucky, and disease if we're not.
Yeah, it's the anxiety is covering an emotion, and shame is often
well
one
said.
of them.
Here's another one that I think is quite common, is if people don't move against or move away, they tend to move towards shame, but they do it by seeking approval and belonging. This is our caretakers.
Yes.
Our caretakers, because you feel such shame. I'm like bad. I'm like, something's not worthy about me. So I have to be very, very loving, and I have to get your approval so that I don't have that sense of shame.
Yeah.
So you see, that's at the root of caretaking.
Yes. The root of caretaking. And I also see a lot that because with shame, we feel broken. We feel that our wholeness is not whole anymore. And so I see a lot when you talked about the approval. I loved how you brought that up, because a lot of perfectionism stems from a lot of shame when we feel inadequate or when we feel not good enough. Sometimes people overachieve to hide all those insecurities.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's, the type, I talk a lot often about type A personalities, and I always say, who's a type A personality? And I put my hand up.
Me too.
I am a type A personality, but type A personalities, if you think about what you're saying, there's definitely an element of shame in that, because type A personalities are, they often are movers and shakers. They do quite well in life, but underneath it, what drove that car to make them want to do so well? And the problem is, as you get older, you start hitting walls because you can't always do so well. And then shame's going to come up. Terrible, terrible shame. So we were talking before the show about, the maladaptive nature of shame and how it came out of evolutionary times about the sense that if you're not part of like a tribe, if you're kicked out of the tribe, that would be like dangerous.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Well, evolutionary, if we think about like 200,000 years ago when we lived in tribes, and it was very important for our survival to be a part of the community and to be a part of, together with other people, a part of our tribe. So when we feel shame, it can be very helpful emotion for us, because it keeps us from people liking us, and it keeps us from not acting out on any behaviors that potentially could get us kicked out of the tribe. So
you're talking about an adaptive part of it.
Yes, it's
but
very
we have to be careful though, because shame can be mostly maladaptive.
Well, when does it become maladaptive?
Well, the research really shows that the feelings of shame themselves are maladaptive because they feel awful. I guess what you're saying is that it came from an adaptation that was adaptive. Excuse the pun. Like it was adaptive to keep us. I think guilt is where we get to guilt here a little bit. What you're saying is to keeps us on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
So, but that's guilt again, is to live by the code and do right things. But guilt is, like you said before, I made a mistake. You said shame is I am a mistake. I am a mistake is not adaptive, right?
Well,
in your view, in my view, it's not.
In my view, I understand what you're saying in terms of it can become very maladaptive, but shame itself, there's some research that suggests that when we do feel shame, it can help us to keep people from liking us, and for us not to be too overconfident, too over like that grandiose feeling.
Okay, so interesting.
So shame can help to a certain extent. Now, again, there is a border where then shame becomes very unhealthy, and most of the time we see shame as the unhealthy part because we don't know how to regulate it.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're going to have to talk about is like, what does it feel like? What are the symptoms of shame? I want to read a quote from Brene Brown, who's, her research is, on shame. She's done so much research on it. She's really quite amazing. And she talks about shame, and she says that shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So going back to the evolutionary times, is if we feel we're unworthy of love or belonging, that's the fear in the brain that we'll be kicked out of our tribe. And if we go back, like you said, many, many years, not being liked by your tribe means that you could be out there and the wolves could eat you. Mm-hmm. She goes on to say that we're afraid that people won't like us if they know the truth about who we are, where we come from, what we believe, how much we're struggling, or believe it or not, how wonderful we are when we're soaring. This is another piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So even doing well can be considered shameful.
It can, yeah.
Yeah, so what are the symptoms of shame? Let's try to go through them.
Yeah, so definitely feeling judged. I see a lot of in my clients where this competition. Do you see that a lot, where people start to compare themselves to other people and feel less than their peers? Or
oh yeah, well the Facebook phenomena has certainly. It's brought that up, hasn't it?
Yes. I don't know how many times I tell my clients to delete Instagram just for a little bit.
Oh, yes. That's so funny.
Take a break from Facebook, because when we start comparing ourselves, it's just going to lead to feelings of inadequacy or shame. So also, do you hear sometimes statements where, why did I do this? Or I'm so stupid.
Yes.
Or does it happen to you? I can definitely relate to that. Sometimes I do something and I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? And then I catch myself and I'm like, Melissa, how am I talking to myself?
Yeah.
Also, we can also shame other people. So like statements like, what's wrong with you? Or why did you do such a thing? When we feel extreme self-consciousness. We talked about this, Sandra, when we said striving for excess of power, like trying to always strive for the best and strive for more. Mm-hmm. And I loved when you talk about this too, is that you talked about the caretaker, but another symptom of shame is the victimhood.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So these are all ways, though, that it's definitely maladaptive. These are very problematic ways. Very. So the sensation in your body, we're going to take a break, but the sensation in your body is a very horrible feeling. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to choose this topic because I'm sure people listening right now everybody's had this experience, and it's a horrible experience. You feel like you're going to be thrown out. Yeah. You're going to be rejected.
Abandoned, and
abandonment feelings come up.
That we don't belong. It's one of the most painful emotions that we can feel. And almost everyone at some point in their life have or is going to have to experience the shame.
Well, that's a good teaser for the commercial break, because the thing is, one of the things that I want to get through on today's show for sure is that as I was preparing for the show, because it's such a big topic, is there's so much literature on the fact that vulnerability really protects us and makes us deal with shame so much better. And yet, vulnerability is what people feel is going to shame them so much, because if you're vulnerable, you're like literally naked.
You're more exposed.
Exactly. So I really want to talk about that in terms of romantic relationships, family relationships, and we'll be right back on Straight Talk with Sandra Reish.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Join the therapist who is affectionately known as the Couple Whisperer, Sandra Reish, on her famous couple retreats, and change your life forever. Sandra offers couple retreats in beautiful locations several times a year that can radically change your love life. Couples describe her retreats as life-changing. Regain that loving feeling, bring your intimacy to a new level, and rediscover excitement and joy. Find out more at helpforanxietydepression.com or call 514-796-4357. We all want love and safety. Now you can have it. Call 514-796-4357 or helpforanxietydepression.com.
Change your life forever with the latest cutting-edge products for home study treatment for anxiety, featuring the clinical director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression and host of Straight Talk, Sandra Reish. Sandra is joined by top therapist Georgia Dow in this revolutionary anxiety videos therapy series. Thousands of people have benefited from this scientifically proven treatment approach. Isn't it time you chose yourself? Visit anxiety-videos.com right now. That's anxiety-videos.com and change your life forever.
A fresh look at today's health. Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. To connect with the program today, please call 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Now, back to Straight Talk. Here's Sandra Reish.
This is such an important topic that even Melissa and I are on the commercial breaks discussing shame the whole way through. So I hope you're joining us, and I hope you'll consider calling in at 1-866-472-5792, or you can text 1-514-796-4357, or email info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Has shame showed up in your life? How do you deal with it? So we were having a discussion earlier about the adaptive versus maladaptive and where it comes from. And we found something that we wanted to read about this from a book on shame, which is where it started being adaptive, although we consider it a dark emotion now. So, but originally, this is what the book says. The dark emotion originally served to keep our species safe. Shame was the evolutionary way of us trying to hide our flaw from others. If the others knew our flaws, they would kick us out of the group, and evolutionarily speaking, that meant death. Mm-hmm. So I guess, like many other things, it was adaptive.
Yeah.
And it changed.
It did.
Which really happens with a lot of things.
Yeah. It protected us at one point, but now it's not serving its purpose anymore. And it's almost taken a whole new level. It's become really painful.
It's very painful. And I want to also talk about, if you have shame in your life. Yeah, you're pointing at something. You want to ask something?
No, I wanted to say too why it's so difficult to, when we talked about how evolutionary now it's not helpful anymore, because when every emotion has an action urge, meaning that when I feel an emotion, I want to do something about it to kind of get that relief, whether it's helpful or not, there is a relief. So for example, when I feel sad, or when you feel sad, how do you let that out?
I cry.
And when you feel angry, how do you let that out?
Raise my voice. I don't know.
Raise your voice. Maybe we'll be more aggressive. We might throw things, right? So we might hurt ourselves, like some self-harm can come out.
Right.
When I'm happy, or when you're happy, how do you express that?
Smiling, laughing.
Yeah. So smiling, laughing, having fun. So with shame, where does it go? How do we release some of that shame?
That's a problem. It's a big problem. And that's part of it, is it gets like stuck in you, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to get into the fact that there are things you can do about shame.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the antidote to shame, according to research, is empathy.
Yeah.
And having empathy for yourself and others is like it kills shame. As a matter of fact, there's a very famous quote about how to grow shame from Dr. Brown. And she says, if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. But if you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it cannot survive. Yes. How do you make sense of that?
Well, definitely when we have shame, it's accompanied with a lot of critical thoughts. And that's what feeds the shame, is that we have negative thoughts about ourselves. So I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm broken, I'm flawed, I'm defective, I feel like I'm a failure. So all of these judgment, it's like giving pizza to the monster. It's like feeding the shame, all this negative self-doubt. So why would empathy, why would that be the opposite in terms of helping the shame not survive?
Well, I think it's a process. I think that step one, even before the empathy, well, I guess for internal empathy is like, I'm human, this is okay. And maybe even telling someone your story. So maybe you call up a friend and you tell them, I did this thing that I'm really not proud of. I don't feel good about it. The thing is, if we go back to our petri dish, by telling your friend right away, you're taking away the secrecy and the silence and the judgment. And what happens is, this is where your relationships, I talk about this, are extremely important, because then you're being vulnerable. So you choose your audience carefully. Don't go to someone, a parent who's always shamed you,
or
and
critical,
exactly a critical. But if you, and this is actually where therapists come into play. Honestly, it's a lot of the work we do, because clients have to know, and it's very important that you feel safe with your therapist to say whatever it is. And that's our job. job to normalize that we're not that shocked by, you know, I don't want to be like flip, but like you slept with your hamster even. We've heard a lot of stories.
Yes.
Okay. And there's humanity. And I know that's a little bit of an extreme thing, but sharing your story and receiving empathy in return dissolves shame. So it starts with having the courage to talk about the secret in your family, the secret that you're holding, the secret, you know, the fact that you weren't always, you know, you weren't always living such a pure life, you know, because many of us were not always living such a pure life, even if we're living a pure life now. And this is, again, I could go on and on. This is even religiously where this gets into trouble, is that, you know, that's where the expression people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, meaning instead of us sitting in judgment of others and feeling like, well, you know, I do everything right and you don't, that's unlikely. That's a person who has a lot of shame.
Yeah.
Because by definition, we are very flawed as a species.
We are. And that's too what I want to say is I call this like a shame attack, when we get very critical and when we get very hard on ourselves. And when we tell someone else, we're again, like you said, not bringing in that secrecy, but also we can receive empathy from somebody else that's safe, and therefore it'll be easier for us to give ourselves that empathy. I think that's too most important, is to avoid that shame attack, is to give that ourselves so much empathy. But in order to do that, we have to be vulnerable. And why is that hard for people to be vulnerable?
Well, it's such a great question, Melissa. Great. It's really counterintuitive, right? You're afraid of being exposed. You're afraid of being rejected by the tribe, as we said from evolutionary times. And now I'm going to go be vulnerable and tell people I care, people who could shame, maybe, as you never know, something about me that could be used against me. So it takes incredible courage to be vulnerable, because, and I think that if people are listening and thinking about trying some of these strategies, you have to already have empathy for yourself, because then if I said to someone, you know, like I did something that I'm really not proud of, and, you know, obviously I would choose my audience carefully, but even then, if it went badly, I've got to have the empathy for myself. But the vulnerability is to acknowledge that I can still be a worthy human being and make mistakes. That's vulnerability. And that is true courage in psychology. That is true courage. Okay. And not many people can do that, by the way. We spend a lot of time teaching clients about that, is to normalize that people do things wrong, and to own it is incredibly courageous. And it really is a gift to the world, because other people, when I hear your vulnerability or someone else's, it's one of the beautiful things about our center is that when we get together as therapists, we often do share our vulnerabilities.
We do.
And it makes it safe for everyone else. It really was an important piece of when I built the center, is to not create therapists that are like, yes, we have perfect lives and we're going to treat you guys who don't have perfect lives. It's not horrible. Don't go to a therapist who acts like that, by the way.
Not the case.
Yeah. So that's the answer on why it's so important. What are your thoughts on vulnerability and courage?
Yeah, and a lot of people at the center, I feel, say that, you know, it was a weakness coming to the center. It was a weakness coming and seeking for help.
Interesting, eh?
Yeah.
It's actually an act of strength, wouldn't you say?
And that's what I tell them all the time, is that this took a lot of strength and courage to reach out and to seek support.
And you mean it,
and I mean it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean it.
Yeah. I always jokingly said, like, in my perfect world, I'd only hang out with therapists and clients, because the people who don't want to come in, they worry me. And I'm not saying if you're listening and you haven't gone to therapy that, you know, you should be ashamed. Not at all. I'm just saying that I think that we're in a collective experience together, that there are challenges, and, you know, we all have had our moments that we're not so proud of. Like anyone listening, you know, I'm sure you're thinking of moments in your life that you weren't proud of. You've had moments in your life that you haven't been proud of. Of course. And career moments, romantic moments, family moments, I can say as a mother moments, like, and I think that sharing the story normalizes it. Yeah. But I think that, okay, now here's the problem. What if you grew up with shame-based parents? How am I supposed to go tell the story when I was told, or if I was brought up with the idea that you must never show your flaws, you must never show that vulnerability, because the world will eat you up.
Yeah. And that's another technique too, and a great point, because another part of reducing that shame is to understand where it comes from, like our origins in our family and the messages that we were received, because the shame came from somewhere. So we treat ourselves how we were treated. So definitely looking at some of the messages. And I think when you're dealing with shame is to look at, if it wasn't okay to talk about certain things in the family, that we have to take a step back, acknowledge that as shame, and acknowledge that's not necessarily the rule that I want to live by anymore.
Right.
And challenging that thought.
Right. Absolutely. So I think that's a very big piece of the puzzle if you grew up with shame-based parents. The problem with shame-based parents is shame-based parents have unconsciously will have no choice but to shame their children, which is why this is an important show, because if you live with a lot of shame and you don't want your kids to suffer from shame, you've got to work through your shame and your vulnerabilities, that we are not perfect. Again, we are not. We are a complicated species.
Very.
And our vulnerabilities, by the way, are what make us most attractive, actually. Don't you like people when they admit their vulnerabilities?
Yes, and that's what Yes, that's what I was going to say, is that when we are vulnerable and when it goes well, it develops connection and intimacy that is so, to my soul, it feels so good to connect and to feel that I belong, that I matter. So
yeah,
it definitely helps with
connection. It's so true. In romantic relationships, when someone would admit a vulnerability, it creates connection. Right. And if someone plays the quote unquote Martha Stewart game, like not that she does that anymore, but before her jail, I'm perfect, everything's going to be perfect. It doesn't create connection.
No, it's not. It doesn't feel genuine.
Doesn't feel genuine. Yeah.
So when there's a lot of, it's scary, but there's a lot of rewards for being vulnerable.
Yeah. So maybe when we come back, I'll ask you a little bit to talk about how people can move towards getting more vulnerable. And I'd also like to talk about, I think this is important to make sure we get this in the show, the differences between men and women when it comes to shame. And there are specific male shames and specific female shames, and they may be affecting your relationship right now. And I know they affect mine. There's no doubt about that, because again, men are raised in a certain way, there's a certain role that they have to take on. And it's not been easy for men, by the way, I should say that, because they were raised very much, strong, silent, like that's cool, that's sexy. And vulnerability doesn't really fit into that image. And yet vulnerability is such a necessary piece of a relationship. So we definitely want to talk about that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to take a break, but maybe you could think about in your own relationship, where is shame being played out? Is your partner trying to hide it, try to aggressively go against you when something comes up, or are they always trying to please you? Is that a factor that's playing out? Something to think about. We'll be right back on Straight Talk with Sandra Reish.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Change your life forever with the latest cutting-edge products for home study treatment for anxiety, featuring the clinical director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression and host of Straight Talk, Sandra Reish. Sandra is joined by top therapist Georgia Dow in this revolutionary anxiety videos therapy series. Thousands of people have benefited from this scientifically proven treatment approach. Isn't it time you chose yourself? Visit anxiety-videos.com right now. That's anxiety-videos.com and change your life forever.
Join the therapist who is affectionately known as the Couple Whisperer, Sandra Reish, on her famous couple retreats, and change your life forever. Sandra offers couple retreats in beautiful locations several times a year that can radically change your love life. Couples describe her retreats as life-changing. Regain that loving feeling, bring your intimacy to a new level, and rediscover excitement and joy. Find out more at helpforanxietydepression.com or call 514-796-4357. We all want love and safety. Now you can have it. Call 514-796-4357 or helpforanxietydepression.com.
Your life, your health, your network. This is Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. To connect with the program today, please call 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Now, Back to Straight Talk. Here's Sandra Reich.
So, we're back on this loaded topic. So many comments, so many questions, so many thoughts on shame and shame triggers.
Yes. So we talked about shame, what it is, shame versus guilt, the critical thoughts, but also I'm really interested too in Sandra, your opinions on where does shame show up in men, and what are the differences where shame shows up in women?
Well, yeah, great question. And that's where we left off. And it's important because it's, again, men tend to have one main trigger, which is they don't want to be perceived as weak. Okay. And the thing is, a lot of us still believe that vulnerability is weakness. Vulnerability is strength. I think we should say it together.
Yes.
Vulnerability is strength. It's a sign of strength. But you see, back in the day, they had the Marlboro Man. You're too young, you don't remember that. But they had this big poster of this guy who was a smoker, which was, we were just talking about that before the show too, how things have changed. But, strong, stoic, silent type, not showing any emotion. So the thing is, a lot of men grew up on that image. And if the idea is that being vulnerable, showing your emotions is weakness, that's a problem. What about physical strength, financial clout? Emotional stoicism, same thing. Is if men tend to equate weakness with failure, there's a lot of shame attached to if they're not strong enough, if they're not holding it together. Women, on the other hand, we still as women tend to have a lot of shame about our appearance. But again, it's a vicious cycle, right? Because we have it as women, but society also perpetuates it, right? There's still a lot of shaming women on appearance, and women also feel a lot of pressure to achieve beauty and perfection without not feeling like they have to put a lot of effort into it. And they must be good parents. So these are the common thoughts for men and women. Men, it's I can't support my family. That would be disastrously shameful. I'm a failure at my work, or I'm a failure at my marriage, or I'm a failure in bed, or I'm a failure with money. I did that wrong, I'm wrong or defective. And I mean, we see sometimes men can be defensive when they're, in couple therapy, not that women can't, but if we're talking about something that may have happened that would be problematic, if you hear a defensive man, I guarantee you're dealing with a man with a certain amount of shame. And we're going to talk about that, but there are different levels. Some people are better at saying, oh yeah, you're right, I didn't do that so well. Whereas the sentences with women tend to be, I'm not attractive, I should look pretty and put together all the time. That's a big one. Okay. As I sit in my sweatpants, I constantly feel bad about that because I see all these women who always look so good together all the time. But anyways, it's not.
That's the comparison.
It's not about me. I'm a bad parent. I'm a bad spouse. I never do enough for my family. I never do enough at work. I never do enough in bed. I should be able to do it all effortlessly. I mean, this is a show in itself.
Yes.
I mean, it's Women's Day today, for goodness sake. I mean, I'm going to hand it over to you. But for, I want you to give your comments on men and women. But for women, can we start, since we're women and it's Women's Day, we're going to start first on that. How many women feel they should be able to do it all effortlessly, be mothers, be, at their jobs and wives and look great. And
let's be the best at work, be the best at home, be the best in the housework with our kids. Like so much pressure, a lot of pressure.
And there's shame if you can't do it.
And shame, right?
Lots of shame. And there's shaming going on.
Yeah, there could be external shame from somebody else making us feel like it's not good enough or not inadequate enough. And also internal shame that we feel like we should be able to balance it all. And when we don't, that could lead to a lot of stress and anxiety and also depression symptoms.
Absolutely. Good point. So what do you think of this idea that, men's main trigger is being perceived as weak and, idea if they can't support their family or if they're not stoic all the time? Have you seen this in your practice? And what I said to you about if you bring me a defensive man, you're going to bring me a man who's been exposed to a lot of shame in his life. He was not nurtured in an environment that it was okay to make a mistake.
Yeah, and it comes from the messages that we received as children, right? If we receive messages that don't be such a baby, stop crying, right? Especially when we hear those messages as children, we quickly learn that emotion is not okay. So if our emotion creates anxiety in a parent, or we see that our emotion creates anger in another parent, then we're going to quickly learn to not feel that emotion and feel shameful for feeling that emotion. So we quickly just tend to keep it inside. But like you said before, then it turns into a symptom or a disease.
So what how do we get out of this? Like, for men listening to the show, we have a big male following, and they're like, I hear you. I don't want to be defensive. I want to be okay with who I am, but I feel like such a failure if my wife looks disappointed in me, because men, it's very important to men to see their wife looking happy. So what would you say to them? What would be the strategy?
Well, two things. I think one would definitely be challenging that inner critic, because when we get into shame attacking ourselves, we get really hard on ourselves, and that's not helpful. So one, and I think two.
What would it sound like, Melissa?
So what it sounds like is like, I would identify, okay, this is a shameful thought. Like, we always want to label the thought first, that this is shame. And this is what it felt like growing up in my family. And I'm choosing not to listen to my inner critic anymore.
Okay, so I'm not listening to my inner critic. I'm a man. I'm not listening. What is the different dialogue that I'm telling myself? I messed up. I didn't call my wife when I was supposed to. She's upset with me. I'm not going to shame myself, but I did mess up.
Yeah. So
what do I say to myself?
Well, I think, having accountability. So I did not do the thing that I was supposed to do. However, I'm human, and I will learn from this. I will take this experience. But, if someone else came to us and said the exact same thing that we were criticizing ourselves, we would never tell them the things that we tell ourselves.
Really good point.
We would never say that, right? So
not like that anyways.
No, we wouldn't say you're a failure, you're a loser, how could you not do that, right? So definitely what I try to do even to myself is say, how would I tell my friend? If my friend came up to me, what would I say to him or her?
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
And I think the other one too, what do you think about communicating this? To it, like the example that you brought up with your partner, if you're feeling that there's shame coming from an external force, how would you feel about communicating that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So in the example that you said, in terms of let's say, you feel shame from your partner.
If they throw their shame on you?
Yeah, if they shame us.
Okay.
And we get triggered and we feel shamed.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a bit like parenting. I think it's the same thing as even this does happen with my husband, where one of us has done something wrong and we're careful to not go, you screwed up.
Yeah.
That's no good. It's like, something happens and just wants to let you know, so maybe we can come up with a strategy so it doesn't happen again. I think we're starting to talk now a little bit about one of the reasons relationships get into a lot of trouble is we do tend to play the let's shame each other game. And the problem is the game's very contagious, because once you've been shamed, you're going to want to shame someone else. Yeah. So they think they're so perfect. Wait till I catch them making a mistake. So I think that's what you mean by the conversation. And what about so men with the defensiveness, or it's, again, not feeling that they have to always be the protector and, in charge of the family, and normalizing that it's okay to be vulnerable, that's manly to be vulnerable. Can we accept that it's manly to be vulnerable?
Yes, I think it's huge strength in people's process is to accept that we, all the expectations that we place on ourselves, just to try and reevaluate those expectations and not place ourselves as we have to be the provider, we have to be, the one to do it all, and just kind of, again, I think communication and checking in with our expectations, that it's okay that, we're not all that is expected of us.
Right. No, I think that's well said. And I think that it's also wouldn't it be a different world, and is this not where we're going in psychology and couple dynamics, to even say to a partner, even a male partner saying to a female partner, or, I'm sure this could work in same-sex relationships too, but, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm finding it very hard. And that not be shameful. And I think that goes for the women too, because you brought up comparison. And I think that as a mother, I can tell you that working mothers tend to shame non-working mothers, and non-working mothers tend to shame working mothers. And there's this whole thing going on. And I think that we have to get it together, because we're all trying to do the best we can.
Yes. And
there is no perfect parenting. As a matter of fact, the research shows that good enough parenting is better than perfect parenting, which is good news for shame-based research. But again, the comparison that you talked about can really feed shame, can't it?
It can. It's so toxic. It feeds it, and then we're fearing that we're not belonging or that we're less than, and yeah, so that's why I encourage you, if any comparisons going on, just try to eliminate if you can, and try to just, gratitude about what you're going through and the things in your life that you are. But I love how you said too, when communication with when you feel shameful, is to communicate it to your partner.
And I think that your couple has to learn, to not jump on the bandwagon on when somebody's vulnerable is not a good time to go in for attack. It's the research does show that shame clouds good judgment, it skews perception, and drives destructive and unhealthy behavior. So again, I want to mention on the show that, where there's addiction, where there's compulsive behaviors, if you're really looking carefully, you're going to find a lot of shame. Your partner's drinking too much. Your partner's playing too many video games. You're playing too many video games. These are all ways people try to move away from this horrible feeling of shame. And so what are some other strategies that they can do? If they feel like, well, but I'm really not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not sure I belong. What else can they do?
Yeah. So some strategies that I go through is definitely one, recognition. So like I said before, labeling that this is shame, labeling the thought. I always say that you can't fix a roof that's leaking if you don't know it's leaking, right? So we need to know what emotion, we're dealing with so that we can do something about it. Two is definitely learn the family rules. So all these messages that you got from the family, whether it was direct messages or indirect, and the secrecy around that is just, that can, when you start to understand the family dynamics and the family rules, it leads to a lot of less self-blame. We blame ourselves a lot less. Number three, stop our inner abuse, stop our inner critic. So learning thought-stopping techniques. Again, like what I said, this is what shame feels like. This is what it felt like growing up, and I'm choosing not to listen to my inner critic. And the last technique that I have is like you said, is that empathy. So really talking to ourselves how we would talk to a friend, and acknowledge the error or the mistake if it was, but try not to attach it to your own identity. That I did a mistake, but I'm human. And because a lot of people have difficulty with compassion, because they feel like they're not taking accountability if they give themselves compassion.
That's an interesting point. And you can actually still give yourself compassion.
Yes.
And take responsibility, can you not?
Yeah, because why? Like the self-criticism is torture. It's like, if I beat myself enough over this, that's not going to change reality. Right? No matter how much you punish yourself for it, it's not going to change what happened. So why not talk to ourselves in a lighter sense, where we acknowledge what we did, but we talk to ourselves in a more compassionate, empathetic way, so that we can take that and learn from it. Because shame, again, it just goes into destructive other behaviors if we just keep punishing ourselves over it. And don't we deserve to forgive ourselves?
Oh, yeah, so true. Such a good segue right there. I think that really all these great strategies, and for people listening, I think it's really so important that it's a bit like going to the gym. You have to practice the strategies. You really have to do it, because I don't know how you grew up, but there was certainly a lot of shame messages in my growing up. And I don't think it's something that I could overcome just by going, okay, I'm not going to feel shame anymore. Yeah. I think it's really an ongoing thing. And we urge our clients to practice these strategies on a regular basis. And when we come back, I'm also going to talk about a strategy that involves your whole physical body for helping you with shame, because there is a physiological response to shame. So time's just running by on this topic. You brought so much great stuff, Melissa. Thank you. We'll be right back on Straight Talk with Sandra Reish.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Join the therapist who is affectionately known as the Couple Whisperer, Sandra Reish, on her famous couple retreats, and change your life forever. Sandra offers couple retreats in beautiful locations several times a year that can radically change your love life. Couples describe her retreats as life-changing. Regain that loving feeling, bring your intimacy to a new level, and rediscover excitement and joy. Find out more at helpforanxietydepression.com or call 514-796-4357. We all want love and safety. Now you can have it. Call 514-796-4357 or helpforanxietydepression.com.
Change your life forever with the latest cutting-edge products for home study treatment for anxiety, featuring the clinical director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression and host of Straight Talk, Sandra Reich. Sandra is joined by top therapist Georgia Dow in this revolutionary anxiety videos therapy series. Thousands of people have benefited from this scientifically proven treatment approach. Isn't it time you chose yourself? Visit anxiety-videos.com right now. That's anxiety-videos.com and change your life forever.
Your life, your health, your network. Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reich. To connect with the program today, please call 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to info@helpforanxietydepression.com. Now, back to Straight Talk. Here's Sandra Reich.
So we're back talking about shame, a universal emotion that's very dark, very painful, and one that we all try to avoid in different ways, whether it's pushing the shame onto someone else, whether it's avoiding it, or whether it's actually trying to placate people so much so that they, God forbid, could ever reject you. And, if you're listening, you probably fall into one of these patterns because, again, shame is a universal condition. So I promised I would talk about an exercise, but before I do that, I just want to say, and I feel like we're running out of time, and it's important for me to say this, that if you do, it's one thing if you grew up in your family of origin with shame, it's unfortunate, but if you're living right now with your friends or a partner who shames you on a regular basis, I really would encourage you to, reach out for some help, because that is very, very what we like to call in our industry toxic. So if I'm going to go to a friend of mine and say, I really feel ashamed because I haven't been a good mother to my kids this week, and my friend turns around and goes, well, yeah, you should feel ashamed because I've noticed you're really not a good mother. That's a problem. That's a problem. And I'm not saying that people can't, sort of gently say, maybe we can strategize how you can be a better mom or whatever. I'm not saying that people have to Pollyanna you, but shaming someone is not okay. We were discussing this on the break, and the word that came up for you when I discussed this was
boundaries, right? Because when you said that, it reminded me is that, and I've heard this like in my personal life, maybe not directed towards me, but some people, when they say that, that you really are a bad mother, it's like they feel like they're being direct and truthful.
Yeah.
But
there's such thing as too much truth, and there's such thing as shaming somebody.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why it becomes toxic. So
it's not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay in marriage either. I do want to say this isn't a show on marriage, but since we do so much work with couples, it's not okay for a couple to shame one part of the couple to shame the other. It's okay to have needs. It's okay to express them, but it's not okay to shame someone. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to mention the exercise, and I know there's something you want to talk about to help people as a takeaway. So I'll just mention the exercise first. So you had talked about a lot of strategies. I wanted to add one in, which is when you feel shame, it's very helpful to sometimes take note where in the body you're feeling it, and to literally put your hand over the area in a comforting way. Really, literally, there's a lot of research on this to direct a type of affirmation energy to that area of the body, because it's strange, Melissa. We're in the field of psychology, but the field of psychology and medicine are converging a lot these days, because we know that feelings of shame and feelings of depression are linked, unfortunately, with disease. And we know there's research, for example, there's debate on whether it causes disease, but there's not much debate about how much worse the disease can get if you're going through these. So literally putting your hand over that part of that body and saying some affirmations or things to yourself, like what you talked about, like saying, I'm human, it's okay, literally will affect the cortisol in your body, mm-hmm. which is the stress hormone, which is directly linked with almost every disease that modern humanity deals with.
Yeah.
An important one.
Very. And I found that really helpful. And another thing too is I tell clients because shame, again, what we talked about, we can't see it, we can't concretely feel it like we can feel it in our bodies, but is to try and create some sort of image attached to it. So, what color is it? What shape does it look like? Just trying to, where is it localized in your body? Just trying to have some imagery to it. Imagery is very powerful in healing, and also to help, recognize it, but also a compassion. So what does your compassion imagery look like? What color is your compassion? And even trying to visualize, like the compassion color kind of overtaking the shame part.
It's interesting because, 5-10 years ago, that might have sounded woo-woo.
Yeah.
But now the research, this is why we see so much information now in psychology on meditation and mindfulness. And we know that, literally relaxing your body is a very big factor, because we do have the capacity to turn on a parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and repair. And rest and repair is extremely important. And shame is very, very anxiety provoking. I know there were some other strategies you wanted to mention.
Yeah, on the break we were talking about how with shame, it's this really, one of the cognitive distortions is the way that our mind tricks things into making things worse, is really this idea of all or nothing thinking. So when we feel shame, it's like either we feel all good or all bad. And what's the problem when we sort of dichotomize us into all good or all bad?
Well, first of all, dichotomous thinking is linked with almost every psychological problem, because it's not that simple. We are a bit of both. We are both good and bad. And people listening right now might be going, no, I'm a good person.
I'm so good. I'm all good.
But you see, it's very dangerous to think like that, because there's nowhere to go but down. So the truth is that we're all good people. We're all bad people. We do good things. We do bad things. So that's the danger. And it's extreme.
Yes. But if we can accept that, like accept our flaws, accept that we have good qualities and we have bad qualities and we have helpful qualities and we have unhelpful qualities. And that's just what makes us human.
It is.
And when we accept that, it kind of really doesn't mean that it gives me permission to act out very negatively. No, but it gives me permission that, not to be so hard on myself and to look at myself instead of saying I'm all good or all bad. Is just look at reality. Well
said. Well, that's empathy, what you're doing, right?
Yep.
And so you're developing, it's literally, and this could be another show, it might have to be, it's literally developing a love affair with yourself.
Yeah.
And love affair with yourself includes the good, the bad, and the ugly. Meaning, like, you can't just love your good parts, because that's easy.
Yeah.
Can you love the parts that are not so good? It's funny, we're running out of time, but it's the same. I often talk about that even with physical appearance. We don't get to have a la carte loving our body. You got to love all of your body, you know? So, Melissa, you're brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on Straight Talk and helping us work through such a, complex and deep issue, shame. And it's really something that plays out in our day-to-day operations. And I'm just really grateful to you for helping people understand. And do you have any last words you want to say on shame? Any last tidbits?
Yeah, just I'm so, when you first introduced this topic to me coming on the show, I was so happy, because this is what I find one of the hardest emotions to regulate. And it's kind of, the last words I want to say is kind of stemming from what you said before, is that there's no quick way to get out of this. There's no easy way. And how do we get better at something?
Practice. And we're going to do that. And we invite you to do it with us. I mean, the funny thing about being in the field that we're in is we get to talk about these topics, and it gets to remind us that we have to keep working on it ourselves. Because, maybe that's my final message of the day, is that you're not alone. Everybody has this challenge of shame and not feeling good enough. And I'm happy that you came on the show to help to normalize this to people. So thank you again, Melissa. That's really all the time we have today. I'd also like to thank all of you for listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. Really, the feedback from the show has been really, really special and motivated me to keep coming up with topics. And please continue to write when you have a topic that you're interested in. We're very happy to do it. If you're interested in anything that was mentioned today, therapy or any other media, please go to helpforanxietydepression.com. Previous shows you can find at straighttalksandrareish.com. I forgot to say, how do people reach you, Melissa?
Yeah, they can call the center at 514-777-4530.
And, sometimes people do call because they want to work with you and they want to learn how to navigate shame. And, it's just a little thought that's in my head right now is I think another mistake about psychotherapy, because psychotherapy also has shame attached to it, is that people think that they're going to go into therapy for years and years and years. Our goal is not to keep people in therapy years and years, is to come in and that's not a plug for the center as much as a plug for getting help wherever you are. If you're struggling with this, it's a horrible feeling. And sometimes having someone empathetic in your corner, which a good therapist can do, can make all the difference to model what it looks like to have someone in your corner. So something to think about. So where was I in my goodbye for today? Feel free to write to us anytime and leave a question on Facebook. The Facebook site is Straight Talk Sandra Reish. Please join us and like the page while you're there. And remember, you can hear this and any other prior show as a podcast on my website, which is straighttalksandrareish.com. On the podcast app of your iPhone and on iTunes under Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. So feel free to write us and if you have any questions. That's it for today. My name is Sandra Reish, and I promise I'll help you learn to live your best life again next Thursday, same time, same channel. In the meanwhile, this is Straight Talk with Sandra Reish, and keep your eyes on the stars.
Thank you for listening to Straight Talk with Sandra Reish. We hope you've enjoyed today's show, and we'll tune in again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Now, go live your best life.